All right. So welcome to the New Directions in Scholarship and of course to our podcast. My name is Maya Zahajic and I'm a co-chair of the Committee of New Directions in Scholarship of the Icon S. And today's talk is about a book, an admin book, and perhaps maybe I should also disclose that. Importantly, the talk about how academic conversations actually sometimes begin in one city and continue halfway across the world. Because Mariana, who's today with us, I met Mariana in Bucharest, and sometime later we also reconnected in Brasilia, where she was on a panel discussing the book we will be discussing today, which of course caught my attention, especially because we do not have so many good admin law books out there. And of course, as co-chairs together with my colleague Rehan, we were actively hunting for a good admin law book. Well, almost like we like to say that we are academic treasure hunters, I would say. And so what I did what any reasonable academic would do. I walked up to Mariana and very politely asked if she might be willing to present the book, and luckily she was really happy to do so. And of course, the book is very special, and I will leave it to the authors. I will leave it to the people who actually know what they're talking about to talk about it. Because the book has evolved over the time. But before we go there, I just want to introduce the people that I'm going to talk to today. Today, I have Peter Linseth, who's a professor of international and comparative law at the University of Connecticut School of Law, and his research focuses on comparative administrative law, but also European integration, legal history. And along with multiple co-edited collective volumes on comparative admin law, including the one that we're discussing today, I guess, his books include also Power and Legitimacy, Reconciling Europe and the Nation State by Oxford University Press, and of course, appearing this summer again from Oxford University Press, European Integration in the Constitutional Borderlands, the Next Generation EU Model and the Struggle for Europe's Future. His articles have appeared in the Columbia Law Review, Contemporary European History, and so on. On the other side, we had Mariana Mota Prado, who's a professor at the University of Toronto, where I had my research stays as well, where she was also the Associate Dean for the graduate programs from 2014 to 2019. She's currently serving as Associate Vice President and Vice Provost International Student Experience. She's also Brazilian national, and she's taught courses on at the Center for Transnational Legal Studies in London, but also in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Puerto Rico. All over the world. Her scholarship focuses on law and development, administrative law, comparative law, and so on. But as promised, with having said all of this, let me hand it over to Mariana and Peter to tell us first about the book, the journey the book had, and how administrative law managed to stay interesting along the way. So I leave it to Peter or Mariana, whoever wants to do it at the very beginning.
Uh, Maybe I'll jump in first. I would say that administrative law is always interesting. It's fundamentally about democracy and fundamentally about how we govern ourselves, but it also has fascinating comparative dimensions, but it's also the way in which governance often transcends the nation state is probably best understood, honestly, as an extension of administrative governance, regulatory governance. So the provenance of the project, this is the third edition of the Comparative Administrative Law Research Handbook from Elgar. And the first two, the first one was in 2010, and the driving force behind that and the second edition was Susan Rose Ackerman, who really is at the forefront of the reemergence of comparative administrative law as an identifiable field. And I was honored to be her co-editor on the first edition, and then together with Blake Emerson, co-editor on the second edition. But this book, we were approached by Elgar in spring, summer of 22 about putting together a new book. And I knew that Susan was not would want to sort of withdraw from this project, but be a strong supporter of it. And so I needed to find some additional co-editors. And the first person that came to mind was immediately Mariana, who had been a contributor to the first two volumes and had been, is such an important academic leader, not just in the field, but also obviously in law and development. And so she was the natural. We reached out to her. We batted around ideas about how we could expand the editorial group still further. We added Farah Ahmed, who's been a leader sort of in the sort of Commonwealth Anglosphere group of comparative administrative law scholars. And then finally, Mariana suggested, and we've always had this, a younger scholar in an up and coming cohort. And so Megan Pfeiffer is the final person on the group. But I just want to give a plug to Mariana because without her energy and leadership, there's simply no way that we would have realized this volume. There's just no way.
I think that's too much credit, Peter. So I think I'm just going to add that I was, as a contributor to the first two volumes, I was absolutely honored to be invited to become an editor. And as we say in the introduction, it takes three people to replace Susan Rose Ackerman. So three new editors that came on board contributed enormously, not only to the project, but also to the diversity of ideas that we wanted to bring to the table. So I think it was an honor to be invited for me and to become an editor of a volume that I had been part of, a project I had been part of. But also it was a lot of fun, like working together with not only with the group of editors that we put together, but the authors we invited to contribute to the book. It was a fantastic experience. And as Peter said, the first two volumes are sort of a community building exercise, right? So they were preceded by workshops. We did the same thing here. And these in-person encounters, as we all know in the post-pandemic world, are extremely important, not only because you get the chance to see people present and debate their ideas, but the informal interactions end up generating other projects and other ideas. And I think there is a lot that's coming out of our workshop. So it has been a delight to be part of this project.
What I read here, and of course that is why I invited you both. This is between old guard and new guard, but it's also Mariana. You were contributor, and then you were upgraded. You were promoted basically into an editor. But at the same time, I wonder whether anything has changed. For example, in terms of the main claims that have been advanced in the book.
Absolutely. I can take that first to have a stab at answering that question. So we decided to reorient what the previous two editions had done. And I think this third edition nicely complements the first two editions. So the two editions establish a very solid foundation. The main topics of comparative administrative law, it's almost like a textbook, right? If you know nothing about comparative administrative law, you can go to those first two editions and get a pretty good comprehensive sense of what are the main issues and claims and debates in the field. So here, what we did was first, we wanted to bring new voices and new perspectives. So we relied heavily on inviting significant numbers of authors from the Global South, and also a significant number of authors who were younger scholars. So the up and coming generation, as you put it. I think I'm a bit too old to be in that category right now. But there is a very, very energetic younger generation, recent graduates from doctoral programs, people who are still assistant professors, who are producing amazing scholarship, and we wanted to invite them to be part of the project. The second thing that we did, which was also different from the first two editions, is the first two editions had the comparative outlook, but people were largely writing about their own jurisdictions. So, for instance, I contributed for both of them chapters about Brazil. And here we invited all the contributors to face the following challenge. You need to write about two jurisdictions at least. So we want the comparison to be first and foremost the center of your analysis, right? And some people took a step back and had to think about whether they could do that, but everybody took up the challenge, and I think the results are amazing. And the third thing that we did, as I said, the first two editions, they have like this very structured and comprehensive set of topics that are very established in the field. And here we reoriented a little bit with a bottom-up organization of the book. So we let the authors tell us what they wanted to write about, and we let the topics that they suggested to be the basis upon which we determine what the different parts of the book would look like and what the table of contents would look like. So these are the three, I would say, the three main innovations, so to speak, that we designed to nicely complement the first two editions. And Peter, feel free to add if you have if there is.
No, that was a great overview. I would just simply add, so we really did try to foreground the Global South and the idea of sort of post-colonial or decolonized notions of administrative law, and that figures really well in the first section, and that each of the following sections then includes at least one or two chapters that has a strong sort of focus on the Global South. With perhaps the exception of the final section on administrative law beyond the state, except for the lead article in the entire volume, which is on Twale perspectives on international regulatory outputs, goes directly to that topic as well. So it happens to be the lead chapter in the volume, but it also touches on that final section.
It's amazing because I see that there has been a lot of innovation. You mentioned Global South, you mentioned decolonization, you mentioned young scholars. That is amazing. But I want to circle back to you, Peter, because I want to go back to the very beginning. Why did you even decided that this book needs to be written?
Well, it was out of conversations between myself and Susan Rose Ackerman. I was visiting for a year at Yale Law School as a visiting professor, and she had been working sort of in the field of comparative administrative law, reaching back to one of my earliest publications. Without knowing her, I did an extended review essay of a book that she wrote comparing environmental regulation in Germany and the United States. And so she was making certain claims, and I wrote a respectful, I think, thoughtful yet sometimes critical analysis, which, given the person that she is, she absolutely loved the engagement, and she reached out to me, and that was the beginning of what has been really a foundational friendship and relationship throughout my scholarly career, which is I'm now in my 60s, so it's been a long time. But that was just that ongoing conversation that we had. She said, let's do a workshop, a conference to build this community and bring people in. And one of the interesting things that I think that we realized is that there was a huge sort of development in the area of comparative constitutional law, and there was less attention to comparative administrative law. But a lot of the really interesting comparative historical work on state formation really focused on administrative law. And so this was sort of the genesis of it, because I'm also a trained historian and I care deeply about the evolution of state structures, the evolution of public governance, and also the ways in which regulatory governance, administrative governance is spilling beyond the state, say in the EU. So we had our ideas about how to structure it, as Mariana said, and we sort of came up with an outline and we slotted people in to the outline, and that was what we were trying to do. And I'm very happy about how the project has evolved over time in ways that shows the vibrancy of the scholarly exchanges that have been going on for the last 15 or 20 years.
Question is actually about what did you find the most interesting or the most illuminating about the book? For me, it is most definitely what you just said, Peter, that there is very little that we know about comparative administrative law. But of course, I think both of you can say much more than that. So I'm hoping that maybe Mariana can take over from here and maybe broaden or deepen this perspective.
Absolutely. So I think, the book for me was eye-opening, because I think there were some topics that I was familiar with, but the way people were presenting them was entirely new to me, and some topics were completely unfamiliar to me. So decolonization and the post-colonial legacy of empires, controlling certain territories and imposing their own jurisdiction. It's a literature that I was familiar with in the law and development field, and seeing it being discussed in the context of administrative law was absolutely fascinating, right? So I think Gio Kinot from South Africa, I'm probably mispronouncing his name. Peter, correct me.
I think it's Hiokino, but
Okay.
but that's fine. It's a Huguenot name and Afrikaans. Yeah.
He's well known in the Iconas community, so I think everybody knows who we're talking about. He has this fascinating chapter about, and I'm going to read the title, Vernacularizing Administrative Law in Commonwealth African Jurisdictions. So it's a fascinating exploration about this concept of Sally Engelmary of vernacularization, right? Where you get the translation of concepts that are coming from outside into a certain jurisdiction. And for me, it's just like merging two literatures that I never actually thought about merging in my own scholarship. I think the other topic that, again, is reflected in our table of contents is evolving accountability structures. So this is, again, as I said, an old theme, right? Accountability structures, but the authors are bringing developments, recent phenomena that are coming into the field that some of us were not attuned to, and some of us were sort of observing but not connecting the dots, right? So I think here, for instance, Eugenio Garcia Wildrobro from Chile maps the audit institutions and how much they have grown and their expansive powers, and what are some of the implications of this, not only for administrative law, but also, I think, for constitutional law and democracy, which is also another big topic that comes out in the volume. And as Peter mentioned in his answer to the previous question, this idea that administrative governance is spilling beyond the state in a number of different ways also I'm a sort of an avid reader, but not an expert like Peter on EU law. So reading the EU chapters and the discussions about this were really fascinating to me. So I think these three, there are many things I could highlight. Not sure if I'm being fair by highlighting these three, and maybe Peter can complement here by filling some of the gaps in that I should have brought in.
No gaps. It was great thematic discussion. I would simply add on the idea of spilling outside the confines of the state is that in the first two volumes, as here, that idea of administrative governance beyond the state, the EU looms large. But what we were able to add here was a chapter by a scholar, Greek scholar who's working in Qatar, Georgios Dimitriopoulos, on international economic law and comparative administrative law. And just to show you sort of how the community grows, George had invited me to a conference that he put together on international economic law, and he had been using our first volume in his classes about comparative administrative law and how important it was in his work. So he said, you have to come, because I was like, why do I need to come? But I came and we developed a long-term friendship over that. And I asked him for this volume, can you give us sort of a definitive overview, as you understand it, of the relationship between comparative administrative law and international economic law? And so he produced that, and that is the lead chapter in that section on administrative governance beyond the state.
When you talk about, for example, how the book has been presented, what I also hear is a little bit about, and I'll, of course, hand it over to you. I also hear a little bit about to whom the book is also presented or intended, because I hear that it's not simply for the admin lawyers. It's also possibly related to those dealing with accountability, democracy, economics, and so on. So can you expand a little bit on the intended audience, maybe?
So I actually want to throw this one over to Mariana, and then maybe I'll join in after, because she embodies sort of these blurred lines, right? Mm-hmm. She's a leading voice in the scholarly field of law and development, and when we're talking about administrative law, can be understood as sort of the boiler room of public law. It's really the innards and how things actually work in kind of a micro sense. It's where the rubber meets the road between public power and society. And so if you're undertaking an enterprise like law and development, you have to care deeply about these mechanics. So Mariana, let me throw that over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. I may take the ball and throw it back to you again. I think our audience, at least to me, by bringing these new voices and new perspectives, I think we're trying to sort of, as you said at the beginning, create this dialogue between the old guard and the new guard, right? So there is a community building aspect to it that I think certainly we're trying to make an effort to say, hey, there is all these people doing admin law, comparative admin law, and you should pay attention to them. So telling people who are established in the field that there is a lot of new things coming up and a lot of interesting scholars would certainly be one. So I would say one intended audience, of course, is scholars who already self-declare as comparative law scholars, but may not be connected for a variety of reasons. The second audience, I think, is the people who don't think admin law applies to their fields, right? And I think my earlier example about post-colonial legacies is a prevalent topic in law and development. And I think Peter nicely put, admin law is so important for everything that happens within the state and involving the state. And yet people may not automatically go there. So I think these interdisciplinary connections, I think the constitutional law scholars, the law and development scholars, the economic regulation scholars, we're sort of trying to say there are topics in administrative law that touch upon your scholarship. And finally, our book has a lot of what I would classify as law and society scholarship. So some of the authors have gone beyond the discussion of legal cases and doctrinal analysis to sort of analyze practices, right? Let's go down to the ground and see what's happening and how that informs what we think about the law. And so this law and society scholarship is coming to the fore in order to tell us maybe we should be rethinking some of the concepts based on empirical studies. So I think there is a sort of a push for anybody interested in interdisciplinary research to bring admin law into the fold. And I'm throwing the ball back at you, Peter, in case I missed anybody.
No, yeah. Or Maya, I don't know if you were hopping. I mean, I would just say that anyone who's interested in public law, even if you think that you're interested in public law within a particular jurisdiction, if you scratch the surface, say historically, you're going to find, these classic sort of topics, the phenomena that have been an object of comparative analysis for years, transplants, policy diffusion, if you're going to use the language of political science, you're going to find people are looking at models of governance from other jurisdictions. And so these phenomena that are the bread and butter of comparative law as a field are present. Even though everyone has this idea that, administrative law is very much bound up with the state, and the state is tied to sovereignty, and sovereignty, is a kind of an enclosed sort of concept, which is itself false. And these assertions travel across borders. And so within Europe, obviously, that kind of transborder influence is now institutionalized. But it's, the developments of certainly since in the second half of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, have been significantly transnational, even if sometimes by negative example, right? These kinds of things where people want to avoid X versus Y. And so as a dimension of comparative public law, we would make a claim that it's actually essential, that there's limits to what you can say by simply looking at, say, the constitutional levels of governance without getting into the actual mechanics of how power is exercised more deeply into the sort of the capillaries of the state and at the points of contact between state and society.
Indeed, and when I hear you talking about how the book has evolved and who's your audience and how you actually had to change the approach and how you adjusted it and so on to be a little bit futuristic as well, but also to abandon all of those past narratives that we're passed over them. I can't help not to question or to ask myself, how did you develop your methodology? Because the volume still has to have some kind of structure, right? It has to be organized in some kind of coherent way. So what was your approach in terms of methodology in order to address all of those complexities that you were dealing with?
Yeah, I think I can take a first attempt to try to answer that question. So as I said at the beginning, we invited all the authors to do a two jurisdiction comparison, right? And I think we knew from the get-go that admin law has a little bit of a tension, right? Some people like to do admin law from a descriptive standpoint. Some people like to do admin law more from a normative standpoint. What should it look like versus what is happening down on the ground? And it was super interesting in the sense that we didn't impose a methodology. We didn't ask the authors to do one thing or the other. But what came out in this bottom-up process that we mentioned earlier was a series of interesting displays of how the comparison can generate a lot of important contributions. And we talk a little bit about this in the introduction. So one of the contributions is what we call concept formation, right? By setting up two jurisdictions side by side with each other, new concepts come up that allow us to now fully understand or better understand the phenomenon in a way that we didn't before. And some of these concept formation exercises merge the normative and the descriptive, right? Sometimes they are not solely trying to say this is what's happening or this is what should be happening, but they are sort of trying to, from what's happening, imagine what could it be, and then from there try to propose reforms, right? The second thing, as Peter mentioned, concept diffusion is something that comes up in the volume in a number of different ways. So we see concepts traveling from one jurisdiction to another. And here I'm going to mentioned the chapter by Susi Harijandi and Richie Wibowo from Indonesia, where they mentioned how the concept of ombuds or ombudsman travels from the Netherlands to the Indonesia, but once it gets to Indonesia, it's adapted and transformed to the local context, right? So I think that's that's another contribution. And the third one is just differentiation, right? Sometimes these comparisons allow us, by looking outside of yourself, you understand yourself better. So by taking your jurisdiction and seeing how that phenomenon manifests in another jurisdiction, allow you to understand certain complexities about your own jurisdiction that you wouldn't have without looking outside. So I would say these are three methodological contributions that came up bottom up. Like, I don't think we can take credit for them. The authors brought them to us, and all we did was to nicely outline them in the introduction.
But it is still very fascinating and quite amazing that it actually developed also in that way, I would say. Speaking of which, I have to ask about the challenging part, or maybe even rewarding part of this journey. Maybe the question for both of you.
Well, a collective volume is always challenging, right? I mean, but fortunately, we had a formula that we inherited from Susan. Not the formula about how we structured the first two volumes, but the formula about community building. That we knew, because each of the first two volumes was preceded by a conference/workshop in New Haven. And we knew that in putting together the third volume, that one of the main things we wanted was to get people into the same room and talking to each other. And through Mariana's leadership, frankly, we organized a similar event in Toronto. And so that was just fantastic, because as you know, some of the things that Mariana just talked about, you know, allowing those things to emerge is a kind of challenge too. It's wonderful, but it's a challenge. And so to like be in the room together, get everyone physically there, get the resources, and thank you significantly to the University of Toronto, but with a substantial assist from all the other universities of the editors, we were able to put this together and get everyone around the table. And I think that is the significant sort of, it's both a challenge and a benefit. From there, you know, then it's all the usual drudgery of putting together a collective volume and sort of herding cats and getting people to meet deadlines and all those other wonderful things. But you know, as with anything that can be hard, there's tremendous satisfaction when you get to the end of the line.
First, maybe because we're reaching the very end of this conversation, but I want to ask, Um, how does the book actually fit within your existing scholarship? How does it build upon or differ from the books that you've already written or papers that you've already written? What is the difference, maybe in the approach, methodology, whatever aspect you find interesting here?
Yeah, maybe I can take a first uh, attempt to answer that. In my own scholarship, I think the book is super interesting because the way law and development comes to the fore in this book is fascinating. Issues not only about decolonization, but the challenges of accountability in the global south, the challenges of legal transplants, right? We bring structures often from the global north to the global south, and how these are transformed and adapted and acquire a life of their own. This is all informing the entire book. So the book, I have always, as Peter said, admin law is the boiler room of the state, right? So I always thought about admin law as having to be central to law and development, but I don't think the law and development scholarship has fully acknowledged that. And this book provides me with such rich material to make the case in a much more forceful and rich way than I could have done myself, that I think that's a wonderful contribution for me. But Peter navigates in other worlds, so
Well, so I work in the world of on the one hand, legal history, which is not strongly present, but it is strongly present. The whole sort of decolonization framing is obviously uh, looking is looking backwards as well as forwards and thinking about legacy versus innovation. And that's always a frame for me. The second thing is with regard to European integration specifically, obviously there's, the with the experience of NGEU and now with the experience of the upheaval of sort of the international sphere from a geopolitical standpoint and in terms of security and defense challenges, et cetera, is that the whole question of transitioning, say, European integration out of integration through law to integration through funding. We have several chapters that talk about conditionality, emergency powers, and these sorts of things. And frankly, um, uh, I won't say that these chapters prompted me to do this, but indicative of how all of us who are thinking about European integration in a deep way, we have to face that sort of transition from integration through law to integration through funding. And this relates directly to the book that I'm co-authoring with Päivi Leno-Sandberg at Helsinki on European integration and what I'm calling the constitutional borderlands, because I see, for me, that the idea of shifting out of simply a primarily regulatory enterprise into one that actually mobilizes resources and redistributes them, that's for me a fundamental boundary between the world of administrative governance and the world of constitutional governance. And so I have the peculiar claim in the world of European integration studies that I think that most of what has been historically regarded as constitutional within EU law is what I call as if constitutional. It's a mobilization of a discourse that didn't quite map well onto what the nature of integration was. But now integration is in that constitutional borderlands. It's in that phased to a world where it's going to be mobilizing resources. And that is also reflected in our final section of the book here, too. So, very much an impact on my own work.
I usually have a question about how the book differs from the existing accounts in that area, but it would be so insulting to ask this question. That's what I realized through this conversation, because this book is so special. So I'm not going to ask that question at all. But what I'm going to ask is, what is next for you? What are you working on right now? As the last question to both of you.
Well, so I'll take it first. I'll just say that, I've already mentioned what I'm working on, and maybe I should have Mariana say hers first, but what we're most proud of also is the younger cohort that we together in this book. Partly, I mean, I think they had independent connections with each other, but Megan Pfeffer, one of our co-editors, Oren Tamir, who's a contributor, Eduardo Jordao, also a contributor. They are carrying forward through their own initiatives and re-energizing in a completely new and innovative way about comparative administrative law. They've got a blog, they've got a listserv, a blog. They're doing events, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing and what that portends for the field going forward. Mariana.
Yeah, and just to add one more line to that, and I know Oren is organizing a series of comparative admin law panels for the next ICONS conference. So for the listeners who are probably attendees of the conference, please watch out and look out for these panels. I'm currently working on the third edition of my Advanced Introduction to Admin Law, Advanced Introduction gosh, not enough coffee. Law in Development, which is also with Edward Elgard. This is a publisher that I have extensively worked with, and they have kindly, I mean, the world is in such turmoil that they have kindly invited my co-author, Michael Tribuk, and I to revise our book. So we are in the process of doing that. But as I said, many of the insights of this comparative admin law book are now feeding into the revisions that we're doing.
And I would add also that you think about sort of the political environment in which we're operating, in which we have the sort of the technocratic liberalism of modern governance is very significantly a target of this kind of conservative, strongly revolutionary conservative, as to use the language of Maciej Kieslowski, attack. That I think that that what we're working on in the comparative administrative law field is extremely relevant across countries. You think about sort of Bolsonaro, and what he attempted to do in Brazil, obviously what we're seeing in the United States and in certain EU countries. These are that administrative law is often, or administrative governance is often, the target of some of these critiques and backlashes, and that it behooves us all to pay attention to what precisely is the object of their anger going forward.
Thank you so much. On that note, I don't want to finish this on this very, very somber note. I still want to have a smile on our faces. But thank you so much, Peter. And thank you so much, Mariana, especially to you, because, without you, we wouldn't be here. So sorry, Peter, but, it is what it is.
It's true.
It is what it is, but I can only thank you, Mariana, for that presentation in Brasilia, and for meeting you in Bucharest before, and for approaching you, and for you being very, very happy to actually present this book, and then for you for suggesting to do this with Peter. I'm very happy that we had this conversation, and I'm looking forward to your future work that we might present in the future at the ICONS New Directions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for the invitation.